Thanks again for joining us today on another edition for Spincast. Joining us today from the state of Michigan, we've got two representatives from two different schools. Nick Moran is the vice president for Grand Valley State University's Esports Club. And Nick, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Good deal. Good deal. Also joining us, Marshal, BRUMMEL, who is from Aquinas College. He is the head coach for their Rocket League team. So how are you doing today, Marshal?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Good deal. Well, we sincerely appreciate you guys taking a little bit of your time to help us understand a little bit more about esports and the effect on the college campuses throughout the country, specifically in your backyard there. And we'll go from there. So without further ado, let me start off with you, Marshall. If you could, just tell us a little bit about your background, what got you kind of going into the esports vein, and then obviously how that translated to the position you're currently at Aquinas.
Yeah, so starting at the beginning in high school, I was really interested in the game Counter-Strike and just wanted to improve. Started watching professionals, started watching their matches, really enjoyed gaming in general. And then it came to my time at university, and I attended Grand Valley State University and actually started that esports club there. Because there was nothing there quite like it. Everything had, specific clubs for specific games, but I wanted to create something more unified. And then the whole Michigan esports scene kind of grew quickly together at around the same time, about 2 or 3 years ago. And my program director, Adam Antor, I actually met through when he was working at a high school for their esports program. So then he went to Aquinas, and he knew me through the connection between that high school and Grand Valley. And he brought me on as that Rocket League coach, and that's where I still am today.
Now, did you play Rocket League prior?
Oh, yeah. I've been playing Rocket League since 2016 with my brother. And then both my brother and I improved a lot and just really enjoyed it. And that's now the main game that I play. It's my favorite. I love it.
Awesome. Same question for you, Nick. How about you? What was your background kind of getting into the scene and leading you to where you are today?
Yeah, so actually looking at my position, I haven't really taken on, collegiate esports until very recently. Early on, I was always interested in video games and the competition came from, playing split screen with my brothers on the couch as a young kid. And moving up through high school, I started playing games, but nothing too serious. When college came around, I'm like, video games were a great way to connect with some friends, but I'm going to focus more on my studies. I'm a double major right now, and there's probably not much I can do, but I always still played video games to some degree. And when I started getting really good at Hearthstone, which is probably the game I'm most competitive in right now, I was looking for some sort of foundation, to either get to know people, to compete in different tournaments. TESPA has a Hearthstone tournament that I've played in quite a bit, and that brought me to actually the Grand Valley Esports during Marshal's time there. And through that involvement, I've been able to, last year I served as the external vice president, which I'm going to serve as that position again this year. And that has brought with it a bunch of new opportunities and being able to see the complex world of collegiate esports on multiple different levels, not only just as a person who's competed himself, but as a person who's representing a club and a group of gamers, both casual and competitive, in pursuing gaming at a whole different range of levels in the collegiate scene.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And it's an ever-expanding scene. It seems like it's growing by leaps and bounds each and every single year. So let's talk a little bit about that, because there has been such a dramatic change. I think a lot of schools are just kind of racing to either A, get involved, or racing to catch up. So Nick, if you will, expand a little bit about what we see or what we would see at your university there in respect to the landscape of esports. If there's facilities, if so, what are they like? If there's gatherings, if so, how often, things like that. What's it look like there for you?
So I think it's really great that we have Marshall and I here, because Grand Valley State and Aquinas kind of are on different paths right now in terms of the esports program. So Grand Valley State, compared to other universities in Michigan, is probably behind the middle end of that curve, where a lot of schools are really expanding and making varsity level programs or club level programs supported by either recreation or academic leaders. Right now, Grand Valley State hasn't formally, announced it has an esports program managed, as a varsity team or whatnot. So as of right now, we're kind of like a lot of other schools who are behind that curve, where it's all student run and student centric. And we are in a position where we have to emulate what other universities are doing with, for example, paid, directors or volunteer coaches right now. We're all student run, trying to emulate, what's going well at schools who have adopted esports early. So in a sense, it's very liberating because, we're all driven by ambition. We're all students who want to be the best and compete with schools who, have that structure. But we're also kind of, fighting this battle where we have a lot to prove, where, there's a lot going on in esports, and we want to, prove to our university that, just like everyone else, we deserve a seat at the table, just as much as, other sports might, or, other schools' esports programs might.
Yeah, that's certainly a common theme for a number of universities that haven't really embraced it yet. Why do you think that? I'm gonna stay with you, Nick, for a moment. Why do you think that is? What are some of the biggest hurdles or obstacles to get that buy-in at the administrative level?
Yeah. So I'll share my perspective, and I think Marshall would also have some good insight because he was the person who initially pushed at Grand Valley for a program, and we're kind of carrying his torch. And I think that a lot of the difficulties we have, involve perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what role does esports play at a university? Right now, I mean, the only thing that we have to emulate is traditional sports. That's a whole different ball game in many cases. It's difficult to compare, a football program to an esports program. Especially, at Grand Valley State, where football is kind of, one of our big things.
Right.
It's and I think on the other half too, it's difficult to bring in some games, like for example, Counter-Strike, which has to deal with subject matter that might not resonate very well with some administrators. I mean, for a lot of gamers who play Counter-Strike, they really understand the intricacies of communication and teamwork and balancing out team compositions for different roles. But the second you mention that, it's the teams are called terrorists versus counter-terrorists, you have some issue in terms of just the subject matter itself, which takes away from everything else that the game has going for it. So some games, like for example, Rocket League, League of Legends transfer a little bit more nicely. You still have that stigma around certain games specifically, and I guess gaming in general, where people consider, they still have that old kind of misled perspective that gamers sit in the basement and they don't do anything, like we're a bunch of little trolls. But gaming has evolved so much, but it's just difficult to shift that perspective. And I think that's one of the big hurdles that we really have to overcome when we're arguing for a program.
Yeah, no doubt about it. No doubt about it. I'm going to have you kind of add on to that a little bit, if you will, Marshall. Obviously, a lot of good words thrown out there from Nick in terms of what you did to start that program. They're kind of along. But before we get into that and some of the issues you want to typically address with the admin group to try to get that buy-in, let's stick with what he just talked about with some of the stigma with certain games, first-person shooters specifically. What's the reality there versus not? Because I look at it this way. Star Wars, phenomenal franchise in the movies. I'll take my 8th grade daughter to watch that. She'll love it. I think in a lot of cases that content is actually a lot worse than some of the things we see in something like Counter-Strike.
Yeah. So I think with everything, there's there's content, and then there's content with structure, right? So if you just have content, like if you just, dropped your daughter off at the movie theater and was like, hey, go watch this movie, she might not know what to take out of that. Or, she might take completely wildly different thoughts from that movie than you would if you were there with her. So, if we're talking about Counter-Strike, yeah, I mean, you might have some aggression issues or anger issues with the team if you just, you throw them in a room and you're like, hey, just play the game. But if you have a coach in there and you're talking about, hey, this is how we communicate, these are the strategies we're going to use, these sorts of things are acceptable, these sorts of things aren't, I'm going to teach you how to practice, when to practice, how to balance practice in school, and all these other things, then you're talking about a completely different level in which you're facilitating growth of a student so much more so than just dropping them. I mean, I guess in some games, literally dropping them off an airplane and, hoping that they survive. Right.
So it sounds like, if I'm hearing you correctly, I mean, kids are going to play. At the end of the day,
Yeah.
they're going to play games at home. Call of Duty, I promise you, my son's probably upstairs playing that right now.
Hmm.
So the structure and the atmosphere that he's exposed to now by playing it online can be
Hmm.
technically a little bit more or a lot more toxic versus going to a school atmosphere where they educate them, give them a foundation. It's a team structure. Hey, this is the goal we're working towards, and this is how you play the game.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I tell this to almost everyone I talk to. Most of what I coach is communication. My players come to me and they have skill, and my players develop skill on their own, but it's hard to develop communication strategies when you're playing alone in, solo queue.
Right.
So I spend probably 60-70% of my time teaching my guys how to talk, what's acceptable, what isn't. Like, for example, in the lab, the esports lab that we have, I don't allow any of my players to swear. So that's just like one standard that we have, right, for communication. But there's many others that we have.
Talk a little bit about that, kind of expand on the lab and your atmosphere that you see at Aquinas in terms of what you have from a facility perspective, how
Hmm.
often you guys congregate, get together, practice, etc.
Yeah. So this is where you'll start to see a little divergence from Grand Valley, obviously, because Aquinas has been so gracious and bought in so early. Um, so I have a director, like an esports director, who is my boss, and then there are coaches for each of the games that we field right now, which are Rocket League, League, and Overwatch. And teams will practice different amounts per week. League tends to practice less, but for longer. And so I think they practice 2 or 3 times a week for about 3 hours, whereas Rocket League will meet 3, 4, sometimes 5 times a week and practice for like an hour and a half to 2 hours. But some of those meetings might purely be games. So that's just something. Yeah.
Cool, cool. Now, from a facility perspective, do you all gather, do you all practice from your dorm room typically, or
Yeah.
gathering together?
Yeah, so we have an esports lab that's actually in the athletic building that we have, the Stir Center here at Aquinas, and we have 24 PCs right now. I believe we're getting more this year, but each player has their own like PC in which they are assigned. That's their seat. So all my guys, I'll have more this year, but I had 6 players last year, and they all sat in a row, and that was like the Rocket League section.
Got it.
But every practice and game is held inside the esports lab, with the exception of the situation we've been having to deal with now with the coronavirus.
Yeah, understood, understood. We're on that boat right now.
Hmm.
Nick, kind of shooting back over to you a little bit. Interest level. So every year as, campus fires up, students start to come back onto campus and you start looking at the club and trying to generate interest for people to join. Obviously, some people have graduated, things like that. What's the interest level like year after year since you've been there anyway?
So I will say that the reason that I think Grand Valley Esports has sparked so much conversation on campus, and the reason that there's even consideration for having an esports program at Grand Valley State at all, is because of the growth of the club and interest in esports on campus. We've proven year after year, between Marshal's time and my time, that our membership has grown exponentially. So right now, like I said, we're a registered student organization. So we work more like a club, but we try and emulate a lot of the structures in terms of our competitive teams that other universities may have. But we're growing semesterly by like hundreds or 100, if not 200 members. At things like our campus life night, where you're introducing yourselves to freshmen or transfer students or anyone in between.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is so fundamentally rooted in the fact that so many people, more people than you realize, would consider themselves gamers, right? And I mean, whether it be you being very interested in the game on your phone, like let's say you play Hearthstone on your phone, for example, right? Or you play Call of Duty just with your friends, but you're getting really good. You want to try and compete with, your peers, versus a person who might just follow lots of, Twitch streamers or YouTubers that play games, and you just want to be more immersed in that side of things. You want to meet more players and get better yourself, right? There's such a varying level of esports and gaming interest that has really, really continued to grow and flourish on campus. And I mean, we haven't seen any signs of it slowing down as of right now. We've been around for this is going to be our third year, and it's just been absolutely phenomenal, and it's making people turn heads.
Awesome. Awesome. And that's kind of one of the cool things about esports as well is there typically is a game out there for just about everybody. So that's kind of neat. How about on campus for you, Marshall? What's interest level like every year as you kind of start up again? What's that sign up look like?
Yeah, so Aquinas works a little differently. We're a very small college. We only have about 1,200 students,
Mhm.
and about 70% or more of those students are all student athletes.
Wow.
So it's just a very different market. Whereas Grand Valley is like a large school, so you can kind of take like a shotgun approach with like lots of different interests.
Mhm.
But Aquinas is largely a school that recruits students and whatnot. So we actually go out and find a lot of our recruits, or they find us.
Yes.
So a little bit of a different structure there.
Awesome. Let's talk about that just quickly, just out of my own curiosity from a recruiting side.
hmm
How do you go about nowadays, right? I mean, baseball, you hear, you see write-ups in the newspaper and wow, this kid's
hmm
good, he's local, let me go check him out.
Yeah.
How do you go about it?
Well, there's two main methods, right? And one is the one that you just described, right? There are high school teams around here, namely Rockford, West Catholic, East Kentwood comes to mind, that are high schools around here that have teams.
Mhm.
So, I mean, we are always looking at those students. If we can bring someone local in, we want to, because we care about our community and we want to develop students and give them an education, right?
Awesome.
The other way is our teams are good. And when your team is good, people want to be around that and they want to learn from your coaches and they want to be part of your system. And, our Rocket League team was fortunate enough to go down to Atlanta for the finals of the National Association of Collegiate Esports Rocket League finals. So we turned a lot of heads with that, right? Like a 1,200 person school going up against, Mizzou, which has 30,000 students or so. It's everyone kind of looks at you and thinks, what do they have going on there? So we've actually had a lot of students reach out to us for that.
That's awesome. Little David versus Goliath. How'd you guys do?
We lost, unfortunately, but we were the only teams. We were the only team that actually took any games off of them that season.
Awesome.
So,
Awesome. That's awesome. Bright, bright future, it sounds like.
oh
So
yeah.
Nick, circling back to you, flash forward 5 years. Obviously, Aquinas is in a little different position in Grand Valley. What would you like to see in that time frame? If you could look forward 5 years, what are some of the things you'd like to see happen on campus there?
It's very odd because things happen so quickly. I mean, if you were to look at the Michigan esports scene 5 years before, you'd see very little. You'd see very grassroots efforts, and so I think that over the course of 5 years, you're going to see exponential growth at Grand Valley. We have been working with admins and partners around the university to try and push for a program in the best possible way for students. So at Grand Valley, I mean, where we get our players, we're oftentimes, we're supplemental. So you're going to Grand Valley for, your education, and maybe you want to do esports on the side. Because we don't have a program, we're not recruiting, right? So I think down the road, as Grand Valley starts to develop a program, it's going to be, ideally, best case scenario, you always want to become the destination school. You want to turn your program into something that isn't just something to do, but something that draws people. It's a student retention tool. It is a bonus, and it's supported like every other sport as well. Oftentimes people think, esports, if you have an Xbox, you can, be a gamer. That's oftentimes not the case. You need, like Marshall said, strict coaching. Oftentimes, I mean, some people might need psychiatric or nutritional help as well too, and having schools that provide that as part of a rec and wellness department or an athletic varsity department, I think is really important. And I think that's what we'll see, moving 5 years down the road, is schools not only developing programs but flushing out, what's going on, because we see so many schools developing it. I mean, we're going to start figuring out what's working and what isn't working, and I think that over the course of these 5 years. A lot's going to happen very quickly, as it already has over the past 3. And it's not going to become, who has a program, who does it. I think a lot of people navigate towards that, but it will probably become, what structures are we using and what's working and what's not working.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I think esports has positioned itself pretty well too, because there is such a huge community involvement. It's not like some of the traditional sports where you may only have, a roster of 35, or in baseball or in basketball 12. You're talking about hundreds upon hundreds of students that are literally motivated to be part of this environment, if you will. And from a school perspective, I would suspect sooner or later they're going to realize this is a pretty cool recruiting tool. So, yeah, interesting. What is next thing with you? What are some of the more competitive teams that you put out there in what esport game?
Yeah, it looks like in terms of standouts, we had our Rocket League team do very well last year. They competed. They made it to a semi-national group stage, and they did very well there. We field teams for a bunch of games. We have some great Smash Brothers players right now. We had a great Heroes of the Storm player that competed almost semi-pro at some point, trying to bounce around too. We have quite a bit. Overwatch, we field teams for. Our Counter-Strike team is always great. And we try and bounce around, and because we don't have, like I said, the structure, we field, what students are interested in. So recently we've gotten lots of people very interested in Call of Duty. So we're fielding that. When Apex was very popular, we tried to field an Apex team. So, meeting kind of supply and demand as games face in and out of the market. But the teams I mentioned, I think are for sure standouts.
Gotcha. Yeah, Call of Duty's fairly new on the market again. The franchise has been around forever, but the new version just came out. So you probably have a lot of your students running around shooting me in the afternoon when I'm out there trying to really get some stress relief in. Circling back to you, Marshall, rivalries. Who are some of your biggest rivals that you guys either like to scrim against or compete against in Rocket League?
Yeah, so our scrimmage partners, normally we play Boise State. Seems a little bit of an odd matchup, but the way that NACE, the National Association of Collegiate Esports, worked out, Aquinas actually ended up in the west side of the bracket. So we like to practice with them, one, because it reflects a little bit of the ping that we'll get, and also like their program is just so solid, and we have such a good relationship with those guys, and a lot of respect for them. Rivalries, anyone in Michigan. We want to, it's always been a goal of mine, and has kind of like passed down to my players that we want to be the best in Michigan.
Yes.
And that's definitely not the case right now. Oakland Esports and Michigan State are phenomenal, but they're also 30 times larger than us. Right. So that's always our goal, is to be number one in Michigan.
Awesome. Well, guys, we are pretty much up against it on time. I sincerely appreciate you guys coming in and talking a little bit about what's going on campus there for the two of you. Obviously, there's still challenges ahead. This is still a fairly new space in general. A lot of people trying to understand it. Hopefully, our audience picked up some good information in respect to what you guys go through, not only on a day-to-day basis, but are able to provide for your students in terms of some of the opportunities that are out there. So I sincerely appreciate it. Hope you guys stay safe, and I would love to circle back with you guys, hopefully in the fall when things are a little bit more normal. We'll be able to kind of catch back up, see how you guys are doing to that point, and touch base.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks for having us on one more time. I had a blast talking about stuff, and hopefully it sparked some interest. I know for me, when I was moving into college, I had no idea esports was an opportunity, but now I'm in with both feet, and I'm kind of stuck here. So, and I'm loving every second of it.
Yeah, and one of the things you just said there, which is interesting, it's hard. It's hard that first year of school to move in and feel like, where do I belong? And so many people game, again, a variety of levels. This is in my opinion, a natural fit to kind of just congregate and meet people that like some of the things you like and kind of progress from there. So again, sincerely appreciate it. Stay safe, and definitely we'll talk again soon, but we appreciate you being on Stay Plugged In.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day.